lot of material posted. I have short stories like Tall Tales from the Mekong Delta, because so many colleges are teaching that story and sending their students to the website to get it. And I have both new and old stories up there. We have music on the web. It's a resource. And I would like to say to Jennifer in particular and to others that we are putting together a book of Kate Braverman critical work. So if you know or are writing reports in here, we're interested in all levels: undergraduate work, graduate work, faculty work, published and unpublished, for the reader. So if Jennifer, as you come into contact with people that might be doing Kate Braverman
well, I do have
work.
a student from last semester, a graduate student, who is wanting to turn her paper into an article, so that's great.
Well, have them just write into my web, and I can always be reached at the Gmail on the web, as Janelle has reached me in the past. And so here I am, and here we brought some of the records, the CDs, which are also, I think you can listen to 3 of them on the web. So what can I do for you?
I forgot to mention, she also has 4 collections of poetry. So, yeah, 4. Starting with 1 from. Do you guys have questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I guess I would like to hear, before we get to Lithium for Medea, I'd like to hear what the process of this first novel was like for you. I'd just like to hear your side of it. Just like how you felt and what was it this
Writing my first novel.
Was that this?
Lithium for Medea is my first novel, and this was the original hardcover, and then this was one of the paperbacks that it has been in, and this is the French one, which I thought was just beautiful, and I have a Turkish and Italian one, but I couldn't find them on the way over, but I did have this one out, and I just thought you might want to see how books goes through. Do you have the one I designed? Now, this edition that's available from 7 Stories, I designed that cover. It's a broadside that I ran from a photograph and played with it in Adobe Photoshop, and that is the desk where Lithium for Medea was written. And I thought that would, I could just tell you, you don't have, if you have this edition, the 7 Stories one, a photographer came over while I was writing and said that this should be immortalized, the desk. And there it is, and it's a broadside. And I thought maybe you'd be interested in just seeing books go through their evolution and just sort of pass around from 1979, and then it came out again, and then it came out. And there are many other editions, but I just give you an idea about the life of a book, and to tell you what a great honor it is to be a writer and to be able to still have in print, almost 30 years later, your first novel. My second novel, Palm Latitudes, which is my Ulysses, is also in print from 7 Stories, and Frida Kahlo's in print from 7 Stories.
I thought Mothers of the West was your second novel.
Third.
Really?
And it's out of print. And I believe that there are about 30 copies left of Small Craft Warnings, my second book of short stories, and then after that it's over. Okay, the process of actually writing Lithium for Medea I remember very clearly, because I had to read it several times for the French edition, which came out, I was in Paris in May for that. So I had to think about the book and read it again for the first time and deal with it in Paris in interviews. And so I remember very clearly. After I graduated from UC Berkeley and went back to Los Angeles, my hometown, probably a blunder of monumental proportions, but one must go on. And I was a founding member of the Venice Poetry Workshop, although what I had first begun writing was short stories. And I wrote short stories at UCLA when I was 13. Robert Kirsch let me into his writing classes. So I started actually writing short stories at UCLA at 13. Then I stopped writing while I went to college because I knew I was going to be a writer, so why study English or why study writing? So I majored in anthropology and minored in history. I was not interested in I took a lot of comp lit, but other than English 101, which was necessary for graduation, and the professor told me at the second meeting it was not necessary for me to attend, that I could just drop a paper in the mail to her and like never see her again. So I only took one class in English in my entire experience as a college student, until I got a master's, and then I took a lot more. Now the process of writing Lithium for Medea came about. I was writing poetry. I started publishing poetry in 1972, and from 72 on until Lithium was published in 79, which means I wrote it in 77 to give it a space to get the time to get it published. So I would say that book was written in 77. So that meant for 5 years, I just wrote poetry, which I also published, and tried to figure out how to write a novel, because that's what I wanted to do. I was not happy as a poet for many reasons, which I would be happy to discuss with you if that was a separate issue that was of interest. And I wanted to move into something that would have a wider cultural resonance and significance. And as a woman, I did not feel and do not feel that that can be satisfied by poetry. I think that the world that you're talking to and the world that is reading you is just too small. And that is not to discourage anyone, but my sense was the books that read the great performance art piece that you can do as a writer is a novel, okay? While women always do everything. It's never mentioned, of course, that women are traditionally, they write poetry, short stories, and novels, and that just goes without saying. But when a man who's known as a novelist gets out his book of short stories, it's like, oh my God, Richard Ford can also write a book of short stories. You know, every woman writer that you can think of does poetry, short stories, novels, plays, raises the kids, and fixes the car herself, okay? And I remember saying to an interviewer that I did in fact know what the sound of one hand clapping was, and that's a woman holding a briefcase in one hand and an infant in the other, okay? With the map quest of where the reading is in your teeth, okay? So, after I had a large number of poems, and I felt that I would take it out of my own life, as is traditionally done. Of course, when we talk about tradition in literature, we're only talking about what men have written and what other men have said about what these men wrote, because there really is no female literature. And this is something, since we are all female in this room, which is of great concern to me. And that is that, as you know, women only were allowed to vote by special amendment or something in around 1920. Is that correct? Yeah. For you people who took feminist studies or something. And women's access to inhabit the page with the audacity and blood and passion and risk and skill of men has always been in question. Women are always put into writing about conventional women, in my opinion. There's stories about women who are professors, or they're married to professors, you know, and I used to have a thing in my private workshops that I taught, no professor wives stories in here, forget about it. And that while when men write about disturbing events, they're considered bold explorers. And when they live lives of chaos and neglected children and multiple divorces, this is called being an artist. When a woman lives that life, she is called a slut and mentally ill. Watch what they have done with Sylvia Plath and Sexton. Just start going through the small canon of women we have and see how stigmatized and demonized they are on the biographical elements of their life. Men, the biographies of men, the actual events of their lives, are never taken into question. Like, we don't say, well, I think that we'll knock Hemingway down a couple of rungs for that messy life, and no one counts up the dead suicide men leave behind. But be a woman and do it. And that's the first thing you'll hear. You won't hear, she wrote Hills Like White Elephants. What you'll hear is, she killed herself and left 2 babies. I have a serious problem with the evaluation of literature by men and colonized women to the actual work of women. Now, Lithium for Medea came directly out of my life, and I did not know how to write a novel, and I had thousands of poems, and that's why I say sometimes you have to be arbitrary. And I picked, I'm not sure if it was 14 or 16 of these poems, and I just set them out in a line like this. I don't know what, this is a book that's out of print called Lullaby for Sinners. My second poetry book is from Harper and Row. I think you can get it on eBay or Amazon or something. But I took poems that you've read now, Lithium for Medea. Okay, now, these are some of the anchoring poems. And when I say it was built out of 14 or 16 poems, I mean that to me a poem is like a black star. It is so condensed with information, it's so heavy, that when you iron it out and unencrypt a poem and put in everything that wasn't said, I found that by just taking 16 of these poems, or 14 of them, that were incredibly dense emotionally and written in the same voice about essentially the same thing. Jack, you bastard, number 1. Jack, you super bastard, number 7, whatever. And they have different names, but they're basically about this love affair with Jason and built on poems like, let me see, what would have made it in here, into Lithium for Medea, for sure. This was a Lithium for Medea poem. It's called What Men and Women Do. Even behind shades, neon twists limbs to stalks. These are not arms and legs, but leafy branches. And those must be roots rustling across your thigh, arching to my mouth a small sun, belly to belly, there is no air. It is strange what men and women do. You lean on one elbow, lighting a cigarette, telling me of a girl 12 years ago, parked near bushes, feeding on your fibers, making maps with her tongue. In the darkness, where there are no faces, no voices, only wind playing with branches, I offer to kiss her 16-year-old mouth with you. In half-light, you are thick and sharp as a knife, your face swollen, pale and enormous, heavier than darkness, mouth half open, moaning my name. It is strange what men and women do. The body is made whole by sunlight. You select clothing from a closet, brush leaves from your flesh, a man again, strapping time to your wrist. Now, there's a dynamic, I don't know if you can recognize the character Jason in here. People who've read Lithium for Medea, can you recognize that that's Jason? Okay? And when people used to ask me, why are you living with this guy? And I would say, one more poem. I just need one more poem. It's like I'm getting a poem a day from this torture. I can't leave it. It's too rich. This would be very much a Lithium for Medea poem, and it's called Posing. Now, we remember that Jason is a painter. The wind is ripped in a thin patch. My brother fell in a tight, angry bundle against it, aiming for your chest the day before we went to Spain. The stairs are still lined with cardboard cartons, a series of strange tan ornaments, the draft, pinto beans simmering, the plants on the landing, the mirror you found. We sit in the kitchen, day drifts out to sea, sun hangs at the end, is punctured, spilling one fine plum and coral lime. Lamplight rustles the leaves like a pale pair of wings. You mix pinks and peach on your glass palette. I assume my pose. I have been practicing all week, not scratching or coughing, barely breathing. I am stiller than your lemons on kitchen counters, your rotting piers with dark stranded legs, and antique tables with thrift store lamps. Perhaps you will give me shoulders today. I could use them, and arms, and thick strips of white for the torn places, the residues from accidents. If you ask, I will say, I was not born. I was assembled by blind men from scraps. Now, can you sort of see the emotional state of the unknown protagonist? Her name is not known, I don't think, in that book. She calls herself Rose, but we really don't know her name. But she's coming from feeling that she was not born but assembled by blind men from scraps. And it's just full of wonderful, as I go through here, poems that formed Lithium for Medea, and this is definitely one of the 14 anchoring poems of Lithium for Medea, and it's called Spell. And I called it Spell because it was the first time I'd ever written a spell. And I wanted to be a poet and a writer because I believe in alchemy. I believe in the power of the word to alter the orbit of planets. I believe that the word can change physical reality. And I think you must believe that if you are going to write with your neurons and synapses and use blood for ink the way I do. I think that you must have a belief in the magic of sound and repetition and rhythm, and that combined you can make an entity that exists beyond the page. And the fact that Lithium for Medea is being read here at Mills, and I signed 16 permission slips in the last 2 weeks for Tall Tales at various colleges around the country, and also 2 for Lithium. So the idea that here I am, almost 60, to talk to you about a book I wrote when I was 27. But Spell was an amazing poem for me because I set out to write a spell. And what's amazing is that I call it Spell because after this I continue to write spells. I still write spells, and I don't call them spells anymore. I thought this was like a celestial aberration. Oh my God, I wrote a spell. I did not know that this is a voice I accidentally accessed and would be able to access forever. If I had any of my new work here, I could show you that this voice is a permanent part of my writing DNA. It rained the rain of curses and world's end. Puddles erupted in the plaza outside the cathedral in Palma in an unnaturally windy October 2 months before you left me at Christmas in Los Angeles, my hands frozen on tinsel, breathless and stunned, gasping for air. I was one entire year drunk with grief. May you have a nest of squalling infants, stupid women, plants that die, illness, and the endless redress of sunset. Once I loved you softly, lazy as a wife hanging sheets in noon sun, accepting the parallel lines of our life, that impossible balancing act. May your autumn be indecently callous, prolonged and broken. May winter strike without warning, a series of sponge-thin afternoons, withering and spilling their guts on your lawn. May you be empty and cut, and know the moon is a monster and night poisonous, black as a sea of rats. May you sleep with fever and splintered dreams and sense me, incandescent with the grandeur of unspeakable malice. I will you in this life and all. So, can you recognize the rage of the anger in this poem as it became unencrypted into so what I'm trying to get back as feedback is, am I helping to answer your question of how the novel was assembled? By taking poems, they were all, I think, either poems about my childhood or poems directly about this love affair that was happening, because I couldn't stop it, because then I had to write the first draft of the novel after getting one more poem. And I did manage to get a first draft before I had to move to another place, as did he. I must say, we had worn out our welcome. It wasn't just that I had to leave Venice. We both had to leave. Anyway, so once I had the poems, I was then stuck with, like, let's say I had a poem like Rushing, which is one of the key poems in there. And I must tell you, they did not let me keep these poems in. Harper and Row did not let me keep these poems in. They said, this is poetry and we are not going to publish this. And that was in 1979. So that most of what you will see, what I encountered in Lithium, would be 2 or 3 lines of a poem, but not the whole poem, because that would have been where they would have said, oh, that's poetry. And the original Lithium for Medea was twice as long. It no longer exists. It had to be carried in a hat box like Palm Latitudes, and it had the specific poems at the end that appeared in the manuscript, and they declined to publish that as well. So like a poem like Rushing, wild moths beat your eyes wide, you are the candle and arc of light. By the way, I think all these poems are on the CD with music and without. You are the candle and arc of light. You find the fragile blue pulse. You say, it's all in the smell of alcohol and ripening lemons, the light bulb, glistening yellow metal, like a captured moon might be. It's sailing the harbor at Puerto Vallarta, swimming warm water and black sharks to a cove of wild boar and waterfalls choked by ferns. You taste it, filling your mouth and lungs as you ride a motorcycle into the Salinas Valley, dry hot November vineyards and walnut trees got red. It's behind your eyes, it's on your tongue. It's the field where Daddy took off your training wheels and you careened that first bike through stakes of stiff ash-colored birch. It's learning to tell time again and not get in cars with strangers. 40 years of psychiatry, and they're right. It's Mother, unbuttoning her blouse, giving you her great white breast at last. You bite through her startled ribcage. It's day breaking over Hollister, California, land of pine cones and artichokes, hills of horses caught behind the spoils of fences as you ride to the Whitecaps, an ice plant, clawing the slow dunes at Moss Landing, Fields Viridian, Field Salamander, and coral all edging into harvest, and it's Mazatlan and Moss Landing, Massachusetts and Majorca. My God, it's the fields of Mars. Stiff winds cutting paths through red grasses beneath the twin amber breasts before the moons went blind and the vines died. Your arms have been carved by stars. A Santana wind slams through your lungs. This is love, baby. You are young, naked, your navel filled with platinum. It's a sea breeze curling in soft swirls across cliffs, just born on the moon. It's all of your childhood, all at once, before you pull the needle out. Okay, well, that's got to be there in Lithium. In cut up, diluted thing, Rushing is one of the key poems of the piece. So let's say then I had my poems, I had Rushing, I had Lies, I had Spell.
Do you want a better pen?
Pardon me?
Do you want a better pen?
No, because you don't have the poetry, although I think my webmaster is going to, since it's all out of print, put it on my web, all the poetry. But you don't have the poetry book, so, but I could tell you, 16, half of these poems are Lithium for Medea poems, with some of them being utterly crucial to it. But I arbitrarily then set these 14 poems up and said, this is the novel. And my job then was to learn how to write between the poems. And this is why when people study with me and they start out with poetry, some of them stay with poetry, but most of them will use the gift of poetry to fuel the language for larger works, which have a much greater chance of reaching more people. I happen to be in City Lights when Derek Walcott was announced that he had won the Nobel Prize for Poetry, and they had 2 copies, and in all of San Francisco at the time, I think there were 4 copies of his newest book that he won the Nobel Prize for. And that's when he was poet in residence at Harvard. And so there were 4 copies of the book that got the Nobel Prize from the poet in residence at Harvard, who's also black and from the Caribbean originally. And I had a feeling that poetry would never reach the kind of audience that I wanted to reach, to reclaim girlhood. My students and I were working on, from the late 80s to 95, I taught privately in Los Angeles. Christina Garcia was one of my students. Is she still here? Okay. And she wrote her novel, Dreaming in Cuban with me. And what I discovered when I had to leave the poems eventually, you know, you can only unencrypt them so far and connect them. How was I going to connect them? Well, I started to look for what my tools as a writer really are. No writer possesses a full repertoire of the possible skills you can have. It's sort of like sports. You know, you can be a high jumping Olympic athlete, but that doesn't mean you're going to win anything in swimming or in gymnastics. These art forms are as distinct as different Olympic competitions. So to get into poetry, you know, I always give examples of writers who have a couple of things that they do incredibly well, and you stick with those. And I think the hardest thing to do as a beginning writer is to find out what your strengths are and how to stick with them. So the first problem is to identify what you do well, identify what you do badly, identify what you can't do at all, and perversely, most of my writers very perversely do not do what they do very well, but they want to move on to what they can't do at all. And no writer can do that. I mean, I like to say if you put a Sig 9 at Garcia Marquez's head, one of my favorite writers, and said, "Give me a plausible woman character," boom! I couldn't do it. If he said to Philip Roth, "Give me a landscape that will take my breath away," couldn't do it. No writer, Philip Roth, of course, his novels are dialogue driven. You know, that's his great tool. Okay, and he uses it, you know. Garcia Marquez is not a dialogue writer, okay? So you find out what you can do, and what I can do is language. So that puts an incredible burden on how I tell a story, because my weakest aspect as a writer is conventional narrative. You know, I don't really have a beginning and a middle and an end on most of what I write. I like to say that any plot you ever find in a Braverman story is an accident. I mean, it's purely by accident. I want to encourage you to interact with the materials. Now, I would never have known if I hadn't tried this novel that I can write great dialogue, and that all I have ever done as a writer in my 37-year career, if you want to call it that, and why not? I mean, it's a beautiful sunny day. I mean, why not call it a career? Is use my sense of language and rhythm and dialogue as the major forces. That's really what I have in my repertoire. And the other thing that I do incredibly well, and when students study with me, I don't let them use their eyes at all for the first year. We live in an image-inundated world, and a writer's job for me is to do what can't be done in a film. I want to know what is the most important thing that a writer can do that a filmmaker cannot do? Exactly. You go into the interior, and that's what I do incredibly well. It's you go into, the things that interest me as a writer are, yeah, I'll take something right. You talk me into it.
That was really
Okay,
impressive.
almost.
I'm throwing pens to the air.
Okay, so,
Right underneath the top on it, and they dry up.
okay, I won't, whatever. I'm not going to leave the top up anymore because they dry up. Okay, well, thank you. I may get to second grade, who knows? Okay. The interior, that's thought, it's free association. What else is it? What else happens inside?
Self-reflection?
It's all the emotional, fear, pain, rage, desire. What are they? For me, you keep it at the A's, agony, things like that. So it's the play of these things that it's what a book is, to me, is what the page is designed for. If you just tell me what things look like, I could go to a movie. That's why I don't let my writers see anything. What I want them to do is make their own soundtrack, and I have my writers concentrate on what you can't get in a movie. How do things feel? I mean, using your sense of feel. Hair is not a generic thing. Everybody's hair feels differently. It smells differently. Skin is not generic. In my classes, we would now go around and feel and smell each other's hair and touch each other's skin and our own. And then tonight's assignment would be 10 pages on skin, 3 different skins, and 10 pages on 3 different hairs. The way to write is you don't start out writing stories, in my 37-year experience, for me. You write fragments. You write as much of something as you can get a hold of at the moment and put it away. And at the end of a year or 18 months, you go back to your fragments and you will find amazing things have happened. For me, especially when I was younger, the time frame was even longer. But you can certainly say that anything that you have written at your level in 2 or 3 years goes together automatically, because whether we know it consciously or it comes out in the writing subconsciously, we are concerned with the same fundamental issues for quite a long period of time. And what happens when you put the fragments away, even though you don't see how does this figure? It's like 3 pages about going sailing. Fine, put it away. Well, here's like 6 pages of people talking. Fine, put it away. Put it in a box, put it in a drawer. Go back to it in a year. And you'll see that like some of these people have called each other up. They've made little friendships while they've been in the drawer, and they already know each other. And hey, take us, we're already dating, these pieces tend to like coalesce without your help. And that's part of the alchemy of the faith, of walking the plank into the great unknown. And it is like a shark-infested bay with like 60-foot waves, and you think, no way. Well, maybe not. But that's the terrain that you go into. And one of the tricks I can give you of the greatest way to walk the plank and write, do you want to know how to write what you don't yet know? I mean, that's why I'm here. Because if you're just writing what you already know, everybody knows it. And while books that are bestsellers and get great reviews or whatever are books that everyone already knew everything before they read it, so I guess you can feel, oh God, I'm so smart, I knew that already. I would rather read a book and not know what it means and spend the next 20 or 30 years trying to figure it out than to read a book that I already knew before I ever even looked at it, you know? So I'm interested in writing as I love the thrill and the danger of getting so far away from shore that it's almost an abstraction, that there is a shore. There is a point of no return that I passed before I wrote Lithium for Medea, where I was going to be a writer no matter what, and I was past the point of no return. So I'm interested in the way, I don't let my writers see anything. Don't see and don't look. What I want to know is what you're thinking, what you're afraid of, what things remind you of. I want to know your emotions. You can't get that in a movie unless it's, you know, which isn't as deep as I'd like to take it. Or, you know, I want to go a lot deeper than that. And the only way to do that is by developing the interior of your character. How do things feel? What I wish I would have done, but I didn't know to do it, but I can tell you to do this, is there is no such thing as writing block. Is writing block a concern, anybody? Well, thank you. What you do when you have writing block is you just go out and do exercises, and everything that you do the first 3 or 4 or 5 years that you're writing, I think would really help if you looked at it as exercises and took the weight of, well, I'm on the Great American Novel now, or, you know, I'm on my O. Henry Award Prize short story now, and just like, you're not on a short story, you're not on a novel, you should be on an exercise. It's like athletics. You know, you just don't run a marathon. You know, you build up to that. And the way you write a novel is you build up to it by learning, first of all, to love the page and to respect it and to enter into a covenant with it, which I have done. And so I'm interested then in sounds. Now, at every moment when you write, you have millions, literally, of choices of what you can do. And you can do the expected, which is the phone rang and what's the answer?
I answered.
What?
I answered, I picked it up.
And I answered it. How about the phone rang and it sounded like 10,000 enraged, crippled swans rustling, bloated and bloody on the banks of a river without a name. So why don't we just for a moment practice? What I do with writing is I love the improvisational quality of it, that anything can happen. I write stand-up comedy. I write poetry. I write essays. Another thing I can tell you is you engage the world with words. If you are going to be a writer, let us remember that when we used to talk about men of letters, that it was regarded as normal for men 100 years ago, that they would engage, that their correspondence is saved, that their letters are works that deserve to be saved. They would write reviews of books. They would write reviews of theater. They would write political pieces as well as their novels and their short stories. Do we engage the world with words? That's one of the disciplines of being a writer. God, there's so much I could tell you. But anyway, sounds, when I talk about doing exercises, and these all went into probably not Lithium for Medea as much, because that book just fell together for me incredibly fast. I wrote Lithium in about 6 months. It just fell together. It just You know, I think it has a weird plot because I was just stuck with my poems. I had to fill in between them and discover dialogue, which I love. But being a writer is about conditioning in the same way that being an athlete is about conditioning. And it's about conditioning the purity of what gets in as well as what gets out. For instance, I do not now and have never had a television. I do not wish to receive the world in a focus group vetted 20-inch format or something, or a 40-inch format box. That is not going to work for me. So some of the power that I have is because it's not only what I know, but it is what I refuse to know. I refuse to engage pop culture. I am not interested. And for people who think that they don't have enough time, anyone having a time problem with their writing? Having enough time to do your writing? Well, might I suggest that you get rid of your television? Might I suggest that you don't answer a phone? Never, ever answer a phone when you're writing. If it's important, they'll call you back, you know?
And don't answer a phone if it sounds like a screaming.
You know, so if you're feeling stuck, you know, everyone here says they don't have writer's block, which I don't believe. But anyway, you know, if there are times you feel, oh, I can't do it, I don't feel like it, you know, whatever, you know, my dog is sick, I can't write under these conditions, whatever. Then just say I'm going to go out and collect sounds and smells. See, that's another great thing. My work is largely built on very simple things that are just explained by the poetry of my language in an ultra beautiful way, because I'm using the sound of the words to generate the energy that some people can get by having a normal plot. Sounds, you know, you have a chance when you write a piece, you are not just the actress. And you are not just the director, and you are not just the screenwriter, you are the soundtrack. You are the smell track, but most importantly, you are the mind track. And that's what you cannot get in the movie, and you cannot get the way things smell, and you can't get the idea that the smell reminds you of something. It's not that you're going to do so much with the smell itself. How can you make it interesting? How do you make a smell interesting?
And what does it remind you of? You
What
know,
does it remind you
What's
of?
the flashback that is the association with it? You know?
Or tell a story about it.
How it's made.
Pardon me?
How it's made.
How it's made? Now that's a very interesting idea. What do you mean by that sort of?
I don't know, like hot dogs, the smell of hot dogs.
Pardon me?
The smell of hot dogs. And then how hot dogs are made, what they're made of.
Well, and that's one too, we like to associate it. I mean, he said that, and I just immediately thought of, you know, what does that remind you of? Where do you find them?
Where do you find
When
them?
do you eat them?
Pardon me?
A hot dog.
When do you eat a hot dog?
When you get them, all that association.
Yeah, when you were talking about how it was made, I thought you might be going someplace else, which is something that's fine too. But I'd like to take it even further and say that people that are graduating as writers with just liberal arts education, you're really putting yourself at a disadvantage. And I will just tell you that I will not take on a student as a private student who has not had a real science class. If you are living in the 21st century and you are writing and you have not taken a real biology class or a real chemistry class, you don't know enough about the world, not you personally. I mean, anybody. No, the world is now a world of technology. It's a world of, you know, and if liberal arts students are going to only learn liberal arts, It will not make you enough of a person to be able to talk to the whole culture and engage them. Like the last book I read was Ulysses. I finished it last month. It took me 5 weeks to read it. It is the 6th time I've read it. And it's like a completely different book to me now. One thing I do is, it's like they say, you are what you eat. You are what you read. And there is never a moment to read junk.
Well, also, I think any kind of, whether it's scientific knowledge or opens up a whole specialized vocabulary, and if you're interested in reinventing the language, part of what is new is talking about, if you're trying to, I don't know, articulate love, using that in the language of the snail, mating ritual or something. I mean, like, just reappropriating that language and doing something new and different with it in the realm of creative writing.
I think that, yeah, science is something that really needs to be dealt with by any writer who wants to be read in 30 years. And reading Joyce, it was interesting that Leopold Bloom spends as much time on the scientific riffs that he does, and they're all wrong. I'm not asking you to do right science, I'm just asking you to, but when he looks at colors, he tries to think, this is what, I don't know your name, the second gal there. Cat? Cats, about how they're made. And Leopold Bloom is doing that all the time. He'll look at colors and he'll say that's made of this pigment and that pigment, and he's trying to figure out if color can influence the current in some way. And this book was published, I think, in 22, and he started it in about 14. I think it's 1914 to 1922, and science, was a big deal. I mean, Freud had already published by the time he would have had all the early work. Einstein had done the theory of relativity by then. So Leopold Bloom and Ulysses realizes that science is out there and it's a player, and while Joyce himself doesn't exactly get it, ABC, it doesn't matter. It's that Leopold Bloom is thinking big thoughts. And go ahead and think your big thoughts and be wrong, rather than to think your little thoughts and have all the little people who don't know if they're reading a novel or the TV guide tell you, oh, I loved your book, I understood everything in it. That is not a compliment. All right, so I concentrate on putting in my own smell track, sound track, how things feel, everything, and I stay away from the visuals, because you can get that in a movie. Okay, what else can I do for you?
I've got 5 more minutes for this.
I really encourage you on these exercises, like after you get, learn what are good sounds, so that, has this happened to you? You have a novel, and you've written your novel, and you're at the end, and it's 9 pages. Has that happened to anybody here? I mean, if so, can I see anybody? Okay, that's happened to you. Has that happened to anybody else? Because Palm Latitude started out, it was 17 pages. And you go, okay, well, there's my novel, it's 17 pages. what am I going to do here? I'm missing something. So what I do is I leave myself setups when I'm writing. I never have a character go to a window unless it's to look out at garden poem number 921, and it's already there, and I just have, she stood at the window, and then, I've got all these books of gardens, I've got books of houses that I've described, and I cannot leave you without the most fabulous trick of all, which is walking the plank. How do you write what you don't yet know? And it is so incredibly simple. When you get to the end of the phone rang and she didn't answer it, because she had decided to never do anything predictable again. All right, let's go on. What did she do next? Come on, who wants to play? This is walking the plank. Let's write what we don't yet know. The phone rang and she didn't answer because she decided she was never going to answer another phone again or do anything unpredictable. Then
She ripped the cord out of the wall.
she ripped the cord out of the wall, tied it into a little bow, and put it in with her panties. Then what?
She hoisted her blanket over her shoulders and
Through the shades.
What?
Through the shades.
Drew the shades. And then she went and got glue and glued them down. You know, it's just, what I'm trying to say to you is,
I
when
know, see
you
that.
when you get to the end of your sentence, this is one of the best exercises ever. You get to the end of the doorbell and she answered it, period. The doorbell rang and she answered it, comma. And what I would like people to do, like if we were having a workshop now, I think what I would do is give you the doorbell rang, and I want 10 pages, and I don't want a period in there. You can, kill Mrs. Johnson from the 4th grade, who told you it's got to have a capital, it's got to have a period at the end, Mrs. Johnson has forgotten you. It's time for you to forget her. Forget punctuation. Anybody, any, editor anywhere, anyone who took English 103 can punctuate for you. The thing is to write what you don't know. You love the run-on sentence. There is no such thing as a run-on sentence. Read Joyce. He's got sentences that go for pages. And that's how I get into the unknown, is just by walking the plank and never putting a period in. And then what happens? Don't be afraid of being ridiculous, because part of greatness is to be very close to the ridiculous, and it is to be very close to making mistakes, horrible mistakes.
That's all right, the privacy of your own home.
But the point is, if you must veer on the side of economy and safety, or to veer on the side of thrill and excess, veer on the side of excess. You can always cut. You can always punctuate. You can always move things around. Okay, it's not set in stone. I move. I look at my work as being very architectural and three-dimensional, and that it's meant to be moved. It's a good paragraph, but it would be better later or earlier, These things are meant to be moved around. Try 10 pages without a single period, and force yourself to say what you don't yet know. And I think that that's one of the great magical things that happens in the covenant with the work, is when you see it's a dance. You do some, and the page does some. You cannot dictate to the page. You must get yourself in a place where you're doing it, and it's doing it. It's a dance. Does that make sense? Okay. I must tell you how honored I feel that you are reading a work that I wrote 30 years ago, and it was really it was the easiest of my books to write. So just take the chance, but if you don't experiment, you won't know what you can do and what you can't do, and what you should stay away from. And some things that people do naturally, they think, oh, well, I do that naturally, what the hell? I'll move on to something I can't do at all. No, you pay attention to what you do very well and make it even better, and you can call that a career. So anyway, great pleasure. I am in the Bay Area. I live in San Francisco, and I am unemployed. So I'm around. Thank you.
We got Braverman.com.
Yeah.
Okay.